Welcome to The Paul Spradley Show, a show dedicated to real strategies from real people practicing real leadership in diverse and inclusive cultures. And now here's your host, CEO of the diversity training firm, the Care-Based Leadership Collaborative, Dr. Paul David Spradley. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm happy to be here on The Paul Spradley Show. We've got a great lineup for you in this first season. And so my guest today is none other than sociology professor from the University of California, University of Pennsylvania, I should say, Jessica Spradley. No relation. Actually, there is a relation. Jessica is my wife and has helped co-found the Care-Based Leadership Collaborative. And but you come in from this work from a different angle, and so have a lot to share and gain. So let's just dive right in. Like, tell us a little bit about you, Jessica, and how you got to the place where you're at right now, where you're teaching people how to interact with others as a sociology professor.
Yeah, so I guess I started in terms of getting into sociology. It started when I was a freshman in college. I went in thinking that I was going to be a biology major because I wanted to be a neurosurgeon after
Makes
high
sense.
school. Yeah. And then I took a sociology class, and it actually changed the way I thought about impacting the brain. I thought that when I went in, I wanted to fix people's brain through surgery, and through this sociology class, I understood that I could actually help people understand different ways of thinking, and that kind of just blew my world wide open in terms of what was possible through the field of sociology, and I was hooked.
And so you're interested in changing the way people think. For what reason? Like how? In what spaces, I guess?
Yeah, so one of the things that I have the most experience in is education, places of education. And for me, I want to be able to empower people to have multiple lenses to look through in terms of what they're learning, how they're learning, what knowledge is. So it's kind of a philosophical quest, but at the same time, it's empowering people to make choices and have choices.
So you talk about multiple lenses, right? And that I'm making the assumption that people kind of grow up with one lens or one framework. Is that accurate? Like, would you say that most people, their worldview is sort of limited, or how would you talk about that?
Yeah, I think that for most people, the context of the way that you grow up and what you grow up in is usually consistent. There's not a whole lot of social mobility in terms of young lives, and you don't have any control over that. So a 5-year-old whose parents are rich or poor, they have zero control over that. They don't contribute to it. They're living. And at the point where you start to experience education, as you get older and you're choosing your own career path and the way that you want to go, that's when those multiple lenses come in. Because then as you start adulting, you actually are able to see things from different perspectives. It's not guaranteed that you're going to live the way that you grew up. You have some opportunities for social mobility. There's opportunities to go up the social ladder, the economic ladder, or go down. And so there's a lot of variety in terms of what you can experience as an adult that you have control over. So I think it's very important to be able to not only understand those lenses, but also if you don't have any change in the way that you grew up, allowing yourself to see things from different perspectives, I think is powerful.
Interesting. So that was kind of the root, the basis of you getting into sociology. Tell us about your journey after that. Like, how did you sort of navigate this field, and how did you continue to grow and add new lenses and perspective in your own walk?
Yeah, so I think that I went on a kind of a personal journey when I was in undergrad. I grew up in a non-Black neighborhood around a lot of Puerto Rican and Mexican immigrants, and then we moved to, I would say, a white neighborhood. And so I didn't have a whole lot of experience around urban Black people. So in high school, I was not Black enough to be with all the Black people, but I was too Black to be with any other group. And so there was this identity struggle that I went through. And so when I was in college, my sophomore year, I took a semester abroad and I went to Africa, thinking that it would help me gain some historical perspective about my culture. And it did in terms of understanding African culture, but it gave me more knowledge of how to connect what I was experiencing to a view through globalization, and not necessarily, oh, I'm African now, and it gave me personally roots. So I think that in that search for meaning and understanding and identity, that's where I kind of fell in love with education, because there were so many people that were willing to help me go on this journey, and that impacted me, and I wanted to be that person for someone else.
I want you to go back a little bit, because I think it's really interesting when you talk about the struggle space of your identity, right? Like, so when we're presenting, there's people that will come up to us afterwards and will say things like, for so long I've struggled in who I am, in my own identity, in my voice, and even like they're grown-ups, they're saying this to us, and they just haven't had a chance to work through some of that. Maybe speak a little bit to that struggle space, like how did you come to know that you were struggling, and what did those feelings feel like that you were able to put words to? Because there are people, I think, even listening right now that are struggling with their voice, with their identity as an immigrant American, as a Black American, as a white American who understands sort of privilege and some of these other things. Like, talk about what that sort of understanding, that struggle space felt like, and what that meant for you.
Yeah, so I think so in the field of sociology, I understand how social factors influence what we do, what we believe, how we think, how we perceive the world around us. And that social pressure creates boxes. And that's how people are socialized into the world. And so what happens is, as a kid and as a young adult, you have these boxes that things fit in. Your understanding of Blackness, your understanding of Native people, your understanding of immigrants. There's a small box in your brain that kind of houses everything. And what happens, I think, is that these boxes are so general that nobody fits in them. It's a fictitious social construction of what these blank people should look like, be like, talk like, etc. And when you don't fit in that, it causes an internal conflict. And so one of the things that I argued in my master's thesis was that I wish scholars would take some theoretical frameworks a step further. So for example, Du Bois's theory of double consciousness. He talks about understanding the way that the world sees you and the way that you see yourself. And I argue that there needs to be a third consciousness, because as you change, your view of yourself changes, and you need to be reflective on that. So there's an additional consciousness that comes in, and that's where that identity piece comes in, right? Because as you learn more, as you grow more, you understand where you fit in, you understand if you're in this box or if you're not in this box, and then you actually have the choice of completely stepping out of the box and still holding on to that identity. So for me, it was, when I was struggling with my identity, it was because I didn't fit in this box that society had created for Black women.
Right.
And I struggled with that because I wanted to be a Black woman. I was proud of being Black. I was proud of being a woman, but I didn't fit into what they said this should be. And so as I learned more, as I grew more, as I became more confident in my voice and myself, I am who I am, and I am a Black woman, and I don't fit into that box, and it's okay.
Yeah, that growth process for you, right? So I know for me, when I tell my story about me trying to find my voice and not necessarily hearing it, the process for me started with someone speaking sort of life into me, right? Like they said, do you realize that you're this? Do you see yourself being a leader in these spaces? And I hadn't. Mentally, I was falling into the box that I had been conditioned to. And so What was that growth process like for you? What were some of the things, some of the tangible things that you did? Because I'm sure there might be someone listening and saying, listen, I'm in that space. I've gone to Thanksgiving dinners and I'm getting increasingly more uncomfortable with the conversation because I'm growing as a person. And so what was that growth process like for you?
Yeah, I think that there's one significant experience that I always look back on, and it's with a teacher that I had when I was in elementary school, and I had cheated on a test. Dun, dun, dun.
Yep. I'm actually going to call the police right now because
and so
cheaters.
don't call 911.
I texted them. It's good.
So I had a lot of pressure that I put on myself as a kid to be excellent in school. It was the one thing that I could control in my life, and I wanted to be great at it. And so I mastered the concept of understanding how to do school. And we can talk about that a little bit later, but I think there's a specific method on how to do school, right? And so there was a spelling test that we had, and the night before the spelling test, one of the things that I share in my story is that my dad was an addict. And with that comes a whole lot of other things, but it also comes the return of a parent after a binge. And the night before that spelling test, my dad returned home. To make a long story short, I didn't get any sleep that night. It involved arguing and police, and it was a very, very traumatic memory, but I do remember going into the classroom that morning and being terrified because I was so tired that I thought that I wouldn't do good on the test. And so my solution was to cheat, because if I had all of the right elements, I would have gotten an A, so why not just get an A? That's my elementary mind working. And I got caught. Right. And my teacher said, come up and see me at the end of the test. It was right before lunch. And I immediately started crying when I walked up to her desk. And for the first time, I feel like she saw me outside of being a student. Like she could tell that there was something wrong, that there was something going on that was more than just I cheated on the test. And so she did two things. She stapled all of my papers together that I crumpled up and put a line on it and said, you need to go home and be accountable to your mom, and she needs to sign this and then bring it back because I want you to tell her the story. And then she gave me a hug and she said, Jessica, you are enough. What you have in your mind is enough. The way that you think is enough. You don't have to cheat. And for the first time, I felt like I was enough. And I deserved her love and her attention even when I did something wrong. So it was okay to fail because that wasn't gonna make people love me less. It was okay to not be okay in that moment because she still was genuine towards me. And that impacted me as I grew, because as I grew and I got more knowledge, I was able to think of it in different contexts. So at the point, I was a terrified kid, right? And I was like, how am I gonna tell my mom I cheated? And then come back to school. I was embarrassed because I was crying in front of all of my classmates. But as I got into high school, I really missed the care that she gave me. And then as I got into college and I understood theoretical frameworks, I can see that she saw me as more than a person. I appreciated the culture that she built in our classroom to where she could give me a hug when I was crying, when I was struggling. And as a professional now, that's the kind of environment that I strive to create in each one of my classes, in each one of my trainings, where people can be open and be vulnerable and re-look at things that have happened in their past from a different lens and experience those emotions.
So in your story, it sounds like there's a few things that were takeaways, right, for someone listening. Number one, finding a person that you can be safe with, right? Like someone that sees you for who you truly are, and they love you anyway, right? And sometimes that person's a family member, and sometimes that person's a teacher, and sometimes that person is a mentor. But you need a person or people in your life that are going to be willing to invest in you in a way to point out who you are authentically and affirm that, right? And so that seems like that's one thing that a person listening that's saying, listen, I'm struggling with my identity or I'm growing, what's something I can do to continue growing? And one of those things is to surround yourself with people that are going to love you, that are going to support you, that are going to be there with you through your authentic self. Another thing was sort of this reflective process. So you had this experience when you were young, but then you thought about it again in middle school, you thought about it again in high school, you thought about it again in college once you started getting more information, because that was a powerful, so your being reflective was something that was part of this process for you. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. One of the things that in multicultural education they talk about is the narrative that you create and society creates, right? And Sleater and Grant, not that I want to get into a whole bunch of stuff, but they have building blocks for what they consider fantastic teachers. And the first building block is self-reflection, meaning that you have to understand the process that you've gone through before you can take somebody else through that process.
Yeah, that's deep. Yeah, that self-reflective piece. And sometimes in our trainings, right, like there are people that won't want to go there because that's a hurtful, sometimes scary space, right? Like to self-reflect, you've got to go inward. You've got to look at who you are, like the patterns that have built you to this point, and not all of those building blocks were good building blocks, right? And it's no fault of our parent. It's the culture that we're part of a culture that. So when you talked earlier about young people not having sort of the opportunity, like they're building their culture based off of what their parents are the blocks, and their parents built their framework based off of what their parents did. So if we've never in this country had really meaningful conversations around sexism, if we've never really had meaningful conversations around racism, and we've just sort of passed from generation to generation this idea that we're going to skate over these really social barriers between people, when it's time to reflect, that becomes very challenging, right? It becomes difficult. You managed to do that in your classes, though. Talk a little bit about how that happens, that process in your classes when you're teaching, because you were at one point teaching at Westminster, at Robert Morris, at CCAC, and now you're at Cal U, and all these students have raved about you in your reviews. She's on Rate My Professor, and gets very high. So I also taught like some classes at one of the universities at Robert Morris, and did not get the same ratings that Jess got on Rate My Professor. I don't know what it was. Maybe, I don't know. I really don't know what it was. I thought that it was fun. People were like, this guy's not as good as his wife. Well, you shouldn't say things like that. Anyway, I'm digressing. You do this in your class, though, right? Like you help people go through this process in 8 weeks or 16 weeks. What does that feel like? What does that look like? And what does that feel like? What's that process? How do you get folks to navigate through this process of self-reflection and growth?
So the first piece of it, and I have to acknowledge it, I feel like teaching is a gift that God has given me. And so I am grateful for that piece of it, right? Because I understand that it's a gift, and so I treat it as a gift. And so I think that that's the framework that I go into teaching, right? I don't look at it as this is my job. I think of it as this is my purpose. And so my framework going into the classroom is I'm involving everybody in my purpose now. And it's my job to not just teach my kids information. I have to understand how they learn, and then I tailor the information and the lenses that I want them to understand to the way that they learn. I can't go into each class and do the same thing over and over again because that doesn't work. It doesn't work. And so what I need to do at the beginning of the class is really understand my students. I know that everybody is a student. I know that everybody's in college, but I want to know why you're there. I want to know how you got there. I want to know who is the safety net that you have under you, that if something happens in college, where are you going to go? Like, do you need that? Am I now part of your safety net? Like, I understand their role beyond a student. I understand my role as their professor and any other role that I may play in their life at the moment. And that's where I teach them from. Right. So I have to establish a connection. I have to establish trust. And I also allow them to be people. Sometimes I will speak for my personal experience, I have had teachers and professors who are highly intelligent. Like, they know their content like nobody's business. But the teaching aspect of it, the relating to somebody else and making sure that they understand what you understand, even if it's in a different way, is a skill that not everybody has. And so I think that that's the second piece of what I do. I sometimes teach the same thing in 5 different ways in the same class. Because there may be 5 different students that relate to the information differently. And I have to catch that student. Like, it's my goal to catch that student because I need them to understand. Because my content area, when I'm thinking about sociology, like the classes that I'm teaching racial and ethnic minorities. I'm teaching social inequalities, social problems. I teach some intro courses too. But when we get into the meat of it, I'm preparing people to be social justice advocates if they want to be. And so the way that I teach them, I need them to be able to go out into the world and empower other people to see things through different lenses.
So I kind of want to stop right there and in the world, what does that look like? What does sociology in the world look like? And we only have a little bit of time left,
Yeah.
so so for the people that are listening that work in corporate America, that wake up, they have a family, they go to work, they interact with their colleagues, they come home, and they may not see social issues or social relationships or social justice as maybe something that's even in their purview or part of their duties. How would you connect what you're doing in classroom spaces to the folks that are listening right now that are not a social justice advocate or that they're not a student in your class?
So when I think about sociology and society, it's a very, very vast discipline, right? But for the average person, a lot of times you don't realize what you're doing has so much history and culture in it. So one of the activities that I love to do with my students is we pick out their favorite song. And that means that in the class, I'm listening to everything from Miles Davis to Little Uzi Vert, or Lil, L-I-L, right?
Lil.
And so
Lil.
it's so much fun because I get to see where my students come from. But then as they're sharing what they like, we dive deeper into it, right? So then I ask them what their parents' music choices are. What they listened to when they were on the way to school in kindergarten. What they listened to on the way to the grocery store. If their moms or grandmas were anything like my mom, it was 5:30 in the morning on Saturdays and Sundays. She was getting up to clean. What kind of music was in the background?
Yeah.
And so
for my mom, it was Wish 99.7, easy listening.
Easy.
You know, like Celine Dion.
Ah.
Yeah, I don't know.
We were old school, rough side of the mountain gospel tapes. Yes, side A and side B, right? Like same rotation every weekend. And then like when you look at that, that influences your music choice, right? Because a lot of times the beats are the same, the content of the music is the same. And that's something that's been passed down from generation to generation. So it's your appreciation for the music, your identification with the words and the songs. And so what started out as what's your favorite song now goes into how has your surroundings, your social surroundings impacted what you actually like. So sociology is everywhere. It's not just like if you're walking to work, you're just driving to work, sociology is there because what are you listening to? What kind of car are you driving? Are you driving a economic friendly car, or are you
Ballin'.
one person
Are you
in an
ballin'?
18 passenger van? I'm just saying, right?
Or like a Hummer. Remember in the like 2000s when people would
Oh
get
yeah, the big
large
Hummers, and I was like,
No
oh.
offense if you were still driving. I know they've gotten smaller, but those things were, it was like 100 gallons a gallon.
to
I
get
just- I
across
would laugh-
town.
Yeah, I would laugh at my friends that would get that, whatever. But I see what you're saying, because sociology is about,
It's in everything.
how would you summarize what sociology is in 30 words or less?
In 30 words or less.
What
I
is it?
would say sociology is an understanding of how the world teaches you what's acceptable and what's not acceptable in every situation, and then how you respond to that.
Okay. That was 31 words.
Ah.
I'm just joking. I wasn't counting. So the response piece is the
Yeah.
thing that that folks can take away from this, right? Like they're in this space of I'm navigating life, but I can respond differently when I see this happen.
Mm-hmm.
When I see this interaction that doesn't feel right, I can respond differently. So this has been great. I hope that you'll be willing to come back.
Absolutely, I would love to.
So a few things before we wrap up. One, so that folks get to know you a little bit more. What do you like to do for fun?
I like to work out. I love spinning. I pretty much love any kind of physical activity that has loud and good music with it.
Okay. So breakdancing.
I do it, yeah.
Okay. And where can people find you on social media? Or?
Yeah, so in the fall of 2019, I'll be starting a teaching fellowship at California University of Pennsylvania. And so my email address is spradley@calu.edu.
Nobody emails anymore. Are you on
you
Twitter?
never know.
Or Instagram?
I
or
am on
Facebook?
Twitter and Instagram and Facebook. On Twitter, you can find me as Jessica_Spradley. On Insta, you can find me as Jessica_Spradley. And on Facebook, you can find me as Jessica Spradley.
Oh, that's very consistent.
It is
I like
consistent.
the branding. And one random question for today is this. If you had to choose one meal while you're eating on the beach, what
While I'm
meal
eating on the beach.
would that be, and where would that beach be?
Okay, so first, the beach would be Mombasa, so it's off the east coast of Kenya in Africa. And it's my absolute favorite place in the whole entire world. And the meal would be, I would bring my mom's fried chicken, mashed potatoes, and corn. And then on the beach, they actually have people who will cut a fresh pineapple for you with a machete, and that would be my dessert.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being on our show. Special thanks to our guest, Jessica Spradley, for joining us on The Paul Spradley Show. If you liked what you heard, make sure that you like, subscribe, comment on this show. And it's going to be everywhere, hopefully, and share this with your friends. One of the things that we want to continue to do is let you know that we have a wide range of guests that are coming on the show. So make sure you keep listening and keep caring. Until next time, take care.